Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about plot hooks. I was going to talk about what are some cool plot hooks that will get your players attached to your story or go for it.
Ah, yes.
But when I was doing research, there were a lot of people complaining that people didn't take their plot hooks.
Right. That's pretty common complaint from GMs is that their plot hooks just aren't grabbed. They don't hook the players into the adventure that the GM has prepared. And I put down my first quote is that plot hooks for your game can be some of the most rewarding and frustrating things for a GM to create.
See, I'm not that hard as a player, right? I'm going into a game and I'm assuming that whatever, just don't give me 8 to pick from and I might pick the wrong one, right?
Well, that might be a problem too, right? That if you don't know what of the menagerie of items is placed before you is the right one that's going to take you on the adventure, that's a big problem, right? And as a GM, you should, I don't know how, it depends on what kind of game the GM is running, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Well, it also depends on the players too, right?
Right. But if you're a GM that has, that prepares a lot and stuff like that, you probably don't have a lot of plot hooks because there's only one.
There's one way to go.
Right. There's one adventure. I think more modern way or a more modern, I don't know about modern, but the latest thing is to try not to do a lot of stuff beforehand, because if they don't bite into that plot hook and then you're trying to push them into that direction, that's considered railroading. And for the most part, that's not, for a lot of people, that's not a good way to present a game, even
right.
though it's tried and tested, right? A lot of times when I go to conventions, I do have stuff pre-planned, right? I do have a plot. I do have a something that's going on. And luckily for me, that players usually know that we're in a game that has a plot and that there's a certain direction. And I present them with one plot hook or one situation, and then they follow that situation.
Well, that's a one-shot though, right?
Correct, at a con, yeah.
So if it's a one-shot, it's a little bit easier because this is the job. I have this job audience for you, right?
Right.
When it's a campaign and you've been playing with these guys for a long time or whatever, maybe it's a little different. They want to do side quests. They want to do different things because you've been trekking along on this trail for 3 years now.
3 actual years or game years?
Actual years.
Oh, wow. So I think, I don't know. I think people there's there's a number of ways you can attack this, right? As a GM, not my old GM of maybe 10 years ago, maybe even more. I keep thinking that not a lot of time has passed since I got this idea, but it has been a while. But I don't prepare like I used to, and I've mentioned that before. I don't. I used to make maps. I used to make all kinds of NPCs, full fleshed out NPCs, like character sheets and stuff like that. Though now you could just make them on the fly, instantly online or stuff. But still, I would do that stuff, and then it wouldn't get used. So I'm like, oh, that sucks, because I would expect them to go a certain direction, and players being players, they don't ever go that certain direction. So all that stuff is lost. I know in Jolene's universe, everything just shifts in front of them, no matter where they go. Which is actually a cool idea. That way your stuff gets used.
Well, I don't see why if you spend all this time making this NPC and they don't go to the particular tavern where they are or whatever,
right?
Why can't that NPC be at the tavern they do go to?
Definitely that's true. Right. So I understand people who prepare a lot and they have these plot hooks. Maybe they have 1 or 2 different plot hooks that lead them in the same direction, or they have 1 or 2 plot hooks that go in different directions, but more or less toward the same end goal.
I think that you were telling me a story about one GM who had put out these 4 plot hooks,
yes,
right? And one of them was a red herring,
right?
And that's the one that people picked,
right? Well, it wasn't even a plot hook. It was it was this guy who actually recently left the podcast Happy Jacks. He was the runner of it, but he would use newspapers, and so he would make newspaper. At one point, he got newsprint, and would make newspapers of Alaska. I forget where they were at. This was a vampire game or something, and he would put the plot hooks in the paper in the articles. And one of this like filler page, he said that he had this blank spot on the page, and you don't have blank spots in newspapers, so he just put this piece about a bear attacking some fishermen. So of all these interesting things he put in the paper that he had crafted, the group went zeroing in on this little side article about this bear attack. And so they went looking for the bear because they thought the bear was like, something's up with the bear. And so he's like, what the hell are these people doing? So they go out, and he's like, okay. And they're out there in the wilderness. His actual plot is miles away. And he's like, okay. And so they're looking for this bear. He's trying to make it interesting. So they come across a bear, a big grizzly bear, right? And they just slaughter the heck out of it because they're vampires or something. I don't know what they were. I think they're playing vampire. And he's like, and then years later, everybody remembers that though. It's funny, very funny, is that they remember going after the bear and slaughtering the bear. And then, and still, that happened like 15 years ago. And I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that happens, that you have these plot hooks that you carefully crafted and worded and whatever, and your players zero in on
the random thing you put in.
Right. The squirrel, right? Squirrel. Yeah. And then all the attention goes that direction. You're like, what the heck is going on? Now, for the most part, I don't ever remember. I guess I used plot hooks. I never called them that years ago, but I would present situations like, oh, you've heard of this, and that's what they are, plot hooks. And interesting things that they hear, rumors and stuff like that. And I've read some scenarios where that's the kind of stuff that happens, right? They go into a tavern. There's possible that they might hear this rumor or that rumor, right? I remember it was a Game of Thrones game. It was I think it was in the original, like the beginner adventure. And there's they could stop at a tavern, right? And there's rumors they could hear. Roll a dice on this chart if they hear this rumor and that rumor. And I thought it was very interesting. I don't know if they were plot hooks, but it was a way of giving information to the players, because they were on a quest to go to the main city, and they were just along the way. And what they would do is they would get information about what was happening around. You're right. There possibly some side quests like, oh, there's some bandits that have been known to have been attacking in up north or wherever the direction they're going.
Well, I think that's an interesting way to look at your game, right? You have your main plot going, or which I don't know. I've never really called it a plot. That seems more like a writing terminology to me, right?
Yeah, right.
So I don't think you can really write out what your players are going to do because they're not going to do what you think they are.
That's an interesting. Yeah, you're right. That's pretty.
The idea about side quests is I like that because, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else. I believe it was you because you're the one that talks to me all the time. Was telling me that you can have these different ideas for people to do, and there's something going on, right? And if they don't take that particular if they don't go with the main one and they do a side quest, that's fine. Let them do their side quest. But as they're going, they're going to hear about this town was a fire burned down this town. And then if the next time, if they don't go that way to help those people, they're still on their side quest, right? Then they hear that the town has been destroyed, like a timeline kind of thing.
Right. That's not my original idea. That I got that idea from, I don't know, a magazine article, an article online or something. And basically the idea is that if the characters don't do the quest, right, the main quest, you hear about kobolds attacking this town, and they put out for help, and the players go, well, I've heard of this golden idol in a cave somewhere. We're going to go to the cave. So when they go back to town, they heard that the kobolds have been attacking, and they're like, well, we're still going to go, but there's consequences, right? That still happens, and it gets worse. And then, so when they get back to town, to the third time, the town has been destroyed. So, like, consequences for inaction, I guess is what I'm saying, where the world's going to keep going, and whether the players interact with that thing or not, it doesn't matter. Things are going to happen.
Right.
And it's not going to wait for the players to get there. I think that's a key part. Because then the players, hopefully, will look at that situation and go, man, we messed up. We could have done something Possibly, you never know.
I don't know that you should be that heavy-handed, but I remember you telling me that story.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that that's an interesting idea. And then I was reading about these poor people. They have these, they're like, my players, I put out this and my players didn't do it. And this one guy says that he had this serial killer that,
that's weird.
but it's basically what would happen, right? If you don't pay attention to what's going on.
I guess.
So there was a serial killer that would take people out of the tavern and drag them into the woods and then like hunt them, right?
Right.
Like some movies that people make these days. So he says that his characters are in the tavern. They hear the story. And then that night they hear screams, but instead of actually going and investigating, they set wards around their windows and doors and go to sleep.
Right.
And then they're on a ship.
Did they say they actually saw the person kill somebody? No.
Oh. Yes. When they landed in the town,
yes,
the person was running and they saw an arrow come out of the forest and kill him. And instead of investigating,
they go,
let's
go to the tavern.
This person's dead. There's nothing we can do. So they went to the tavern and then they set the wards. And then they get back on their ship and there's someone from the town has joined their crew. They're going along their merry way, and every town they go to, somebody dies.
Right. I guess it's a serial killer basically is with them.
Yeah,
going along with them on their boat.
And they don't
not an actual character.
And they never. And the guy goes, they never actually investigated any of the things that. They were doing these things and they never investigated the one thing that he put in there that he wanted them to do, right?
That's really strange. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I find...
One, I wouldn't have a serial killer in my game because I don't like serial killers.
Yeah.
And two, because they freak me out. But two, then I don't know that I would be that subtle. I don't even know if it was subtle, but why would your characters ignore the fact that you keep bringing up they keep hearing the same thing in every town? Right.
And I obviously the GM had kept telling them that this was occurring and they were oblivious to it or they didn't care. Which I hate to say, but ultimately at one point, this serial killer on this boat, I think just to make it, I don't know how upset I would be. I don't know if I should do that, but maybe kidnap one of the players' characters and hunt them, right, while they slept or something. I don't know. I think that's pretty weird. I think for players not to bite on plot hooks, and this guy would just, I guess it was on Reddit, right? It was a question on Reddit. It's a question on a lot of places, and people kept putting in or writing in their
horror
stories, and there was a ton of them, and some of them were very obvious and some of them were not so obvious, but I would think that thinking people that we are role players would grab on to or at least acknowledge something was going on. But sometimes these players seem totally oblivious to these plot hooks, and I'm thinking maybe they just didn't want to go that route. Like the serial killer, maybe some people were like, I don't want to deal with that, so they just ignored it. So maybe, I don't know, because some of these were like bang over your head with a big 2x4, clue by 4, as I've heard it called. And there's a plot hook and it's hitting you on top of the head. And the players are like, oh, well, we're going to go that way direction.
Well, when I was doing the research for this one, I was listening to people and a lot of the people said what you need to do is know your players and what they're going to want to go for. Right. And then there's like different kinds of players that want to do things. There's, you can make the plot hook so their social standing, right? So that they're going to raise their social standing, which might appeal to your group if that's what they want to do.
Right.
And then there's the emotional part, right?
Oh, yeah.
And this one guy said he wanted the players to do a certain thing. They didn't take it the first time. They wouldn't do it, right? Whatever it was. And he goes, and they walk out of the tavern, and he goes, I put this little kid in front of them, asking them to help. And that was all it took. Same thing, just totally different. He goes, he was like, I was flabbergasted that they didn't want to help these people, right? So then he goes, I just put this little kid out there going, someone took my mom. And that was all it took. So he appealed to the emotional part of them versus his other appeal was.
I think the reason that I don't have this problem too much is because my players have always been greedy. And so
that's the third one. Glory and treasure.
Yeah, they've always, I mean, I was playing with my son who was between, I guess we started playing Pathfinder around 7 or 8. And so were his friends. He had a friend his age and one 3 years older. And then my friend Steve, who's basically a teenager. And greed worked well. Anytime they didn't want to do something, I just threw gold at it. And boom, they would do it, every time. And still to this day, they're like that. And they may not even like it. I would appeal to them, to their emotional. No, they could care less. They go, "Oh, sorry, kid. How much gold do you got?" "Oh, there we go." "Well, yeah, no, can't do it." But you throw gold in front of them.
Someone's hiring them to do a job. Right. That's what they do.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't matter what the job is, that you might get killed doing it. If you're going to give me money, then okay, I'll do it.
But that is some very good advice, is that talk about what do your players want out of the game? What do they really cherish? Whether it's money, social standing, what else did they say?
Greed and glory.
Glory. Or if you hit them on the emotional side, like,
yeah.
And everybody has their the thing that they'll die on a hill for, right? There's something that they'll fight for till the end.
No matter what.
No matter what. And so that's the plot hook that they'll bite on each and every time.
But you got to be careful with that too, because like this one guy says, he looked at all the characters' backstories and picked things that they would want to do.
Right.
And he says this one guy had to leave his town because his manor burned down. And so he sends them back. He sends the party back to that town. And he says, 5 times I tell people, look at the manor on the hill, how shiny and new it is. Look at the manor on the hill. Look at all the people going there. And none of these people ever went to this manor, questioned why it wasn't burned down. And they just went right through town. And he goes, none of them questioned the backstory of this person, which I wanted them to do.
Right.
Because I had a plot there.
Of course.
And they didn't take it, right?
Well, you got to remember that depending on the player, right? Some people don't even write their own backstory. They'll copy and paste.
They randomly come up with
They'll copy and paste it from somewhere, and they don't even know what their backstory is. The other people will just write stuff.
Right.
Usually they're orphans, right? Right. So I think with with backstories is that depending on the character, depending on the player, it means something different to every player.
Right.
Like the backstory to Augustine's, most of the time, Augustine's backstory, he probably doesn't remember what his backstory is. Ian, on the other hand, my other player, or our other player, is heavily invested in this backstory. And
his that's his motivation for everything he does.
So if I were to put something out of Augustine's backstory in a plot hook,
he might not remember that it was his backstory.
He might not remember anything about it. If I did a tidbit or even a mention or something that related to Ian's backstory, he would be all over it.
Right.
He'd go, "Oh, I know about this. Oh, I want to investigate this." So it all depends on the player's motivation and how invested they are in their own backstory. Because like my son will literally put 2 sentences down where I would get pages of backstory from Ian. And I'm not saying good or bad either way, but I'm just saying that as a GM, you got to know your players, especially if you've been playing for them for a while in a campaign. You know who's going to bite on their backstory, and you know who doesn't care about their backstory. So I think that's another thing, is that you got to know your different players. And then there's those players who are kind of middle of the ground, right? They thought about their backstory and stuff, and they may not remember everything they wrote down, but maybe you need to remind them, that character obviously, or that player obviously didn't remember his manor burning down in his hometown. But you would, I don't know how much.
But none of the other players, either they didn't know his backstory or he hadn't talked about it, right?
Right.
And he never said anything the whole time they were in the town.
That's amazing, because like you didn't mention that. Oh, this is my hometown. Or as a GM, I would announce it.
Yeah.
Oh, you come and then you would either as a question or something. Steve, isn't this your hometown? I think it's your hometown, right? I think I read in your backstory. And then you go, oh, and that might have triggered something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows what this player, how oblivious he was. That is pretty bad for a GM to have happen to them, right? I had a list of stuff of how to make the plot hooks more interesting. One of them is include something from their backstory.
Yeah.
It's something that the player actually wrote or thought it was important or thought was cool, and used the part of the backstory. But in this case,
You
it
did
didn't
that
work.
with Augustine when we were playing. I think it was Storm King's Thunder, where because he was a dwarf, right? And he looked like a dwarf
Yes.
that had committed crimes
Yeah,
and
he
was wanted.
that's right.
We never knew if it was really Augustine or not because people were always after him.
Because he was a greedy bastard.
Yeah.
And so the idea that there was some dwarf out there being a robber, a brigand, wasn't too far off.
It was very interesting, and it added stuff. So these people every once in a while
Would give him a
poster
double-
would come out, right, that says wanted, and it was pretty funny.
Well, yeah, I think that was actually written into the game. It was there a dwarf? Make him look like this poster.
Oh,
And
okay.
And so I'm like, oh yeah, that looks good. And there was a dwarf. It was my son. And people would like look at him, double take. They're going like, you find somebody staring at you. And they're like,
And Augustine's going, why?
why? He goes, it looks like he knows you or something. And then he was very suspicious, right? He was very suspicious anyway because he's greedy. And then I think you guys came across the poster. I think it was Ian or Alan. They came across a poster that looked just like, I forget his name, what his name was, but it had a different name underneath.
Right.
It was wanted, 1,000 gold crowns for Redbeard, the brigand. And so I think he actually came across them at one point.
I
right?
believe we did.
Yes,
Yeah.
you guys both were like running away from something. It was like something tumultuous was happening in the town, and you guys both jump out of like a window or something, and the dwarf is there, and he's like looking around. He's like, and he sees Augustine's character, and they're like, "Hey." And they're like, "Hey, you're worth 1,000 gold crowns." So he takes off running. Yeah, it was a good game. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say I had my list here, right, and thinking these are good tips to try to get the characters, the players, biting on those plot hooks. And one of them, like I said, was use something from their backstory. But that's really odd, right? That this player didn't do anything. Another one I was going to say is at lower levels or lower experience levels of players, use only one or two stories or rumors or whatever, or plot hooks, and actual plot hooks, right? You don't want to put in red herrings.
Right.
Because you give them a red herring and they follow it, and if they're kind of new, then they're not going to want to do any more plot hooks or follow plot hooks. They're just going to like literally just tell me what I need to do.
Yeah.
Because that's really like...
first time players or like kids, you're not going to give them... I would never give them red herrings to follow. Cause
No.
No, they just need to know what it is that you need them to do.
A little bit more direct.
Yeah.
Another thing I was going to say is if you do have a multiple plot hooks for like different adventures or different ideas of which direction you want the game to go, but you have one that you really want to explore, right? You have one that you rather do than all the others is have a map or have a description or be real detailed about things. You know, have names of NPCs and stuff, and that. And I think that will trigger the players thinking, "Oh, this is the direction that the GM wants us to go to," because he has a map, right? And he wouldn't make a map unless we wanted us to go that direction. Now, when I ran at a convention in last Labor Day, and it was a 2290 low life 2290 game. It was like a cyberpunk game, and
I thought it was 2090.
2090. I don't know, something like that. I think it doesn't matter. It's in the future, cyberpunk. It's over there on the other shelf. So after the game was over, the everybody, we're chit chatting. I'm putting my stuff away, and the lady who played she goes, I noticed that in some circumstances you had a map, and sometimes you didn't have a map. It was at the time when we didn't have a map. Was that just something you made up on the top of your head? And I said no. I said, and I told him I'm using a pre-written adventure that came with the book. And I said no. What happens is that obviously they're limited to how much they can't write a map, make a map for every situation, right? And they probably only made a map for situations they thought would end up being a combat situation. when you have somebody printing maps and stuff like that in a book, it costs money. You got to pay the artist. You got to pay extra pages for all the maps. And if they don't think that's going to end up in a tactical situation, they're just going to say, role play it out. And that's what I told the lady. I go, no, I think almost everything that they came across was in the adventure. Now, it may not have been a lot of description, a lot of details. It was like, oh, you go to this lady's house and she knows this. So I described what the apartments looked like, which I totally made up, because it was more of a role play situation. Yeah. But she realized that every once in a while I'd pull out a map, and she goes, "Oh,
this is part of the adventure.
Yeah, this is actually part of the adventure.
The way we were supposed to go."
And so I thought it was very interesting. It was very telling, right? Because players will pick up on little things like that. So when let's say you have a plot hook and you pull out a map, a treasure map, or a location map, they're like,
pull out a treasure map in my party, and those people will go for it no matter what.
So, and what else did I think about? Just things that will help you get your players bite on. But in those situations that we heard these horror stories on, it seemed like no matter what you did, you don't have to literally bang over the head with the clue by 4 to tell them this is the arrow in the ground saying red arrow going, this was the way to the plot.
I think it also depends on the kind of game you're playing, right? Like if you're playing a modern spy game or military game, these people are probably in the Army or Marines or whatever,
right.
Or they're part of a Black Ops group, or they're part of someone's giving them a job.
Right.
If you're a like
a mercenary adventure or something?
a leverage kind of game, then
yeah.
Someone's wants to get something, right? This diamond is here,
right?
That kind of thing, right? Depending on the kind of game you're playing. If you're playing an investigative game, there's going to be lots of clues, and some of them might be red herrings because it's an investigative game, so you're trying to figure stuff out.
Right.
If you're playing a Call of Cthulhu game, dude, just try not to go insane because that's what happens, and try to not get killed. I mean, those are the kind of things that plot hooks, right? It's not it depends on the kind of stuff that's going on around you.
Right.
The other thing I wanted for plot hooks is the more interweaved the characters are, or the more like connections they have with each other.
Oh yeah.
That makes it easier to, because then you might know their backstory, right? Why does Steve know Ian? Why does
you're talking between the players?
Yeah,
they might know more.
They might have more
information.
In fact, I think the one when we first started playing, I don't know if it was a Pathfinder or a D&D, when we were all from Cormier, and Suzeo, and we
all left the city.
The city at the same time. You actually helped out people by giving them connections to each other. You saw this person leaving. You knew this person. You different kinds of connections.
Right. That was a major campaign that I started. It was 5th edition D&D, and I think even Chris was there.
Yes.
And even I think even
Mel was there.
Mel was there.
Yeah.
And so what I did, and those were. They made characters all on their own because, I don't know, just the way it happened. And I sent emails to everybody asking them what characters they made, blah, 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 and stuff like that. And then I asked them for sort of a backstory, like, what is your idea? What is your character's backstory? And everybody had different levels of backstory. And then I said, well, you know this person because this person is your friend or something. And it was another character of another player, obviously. And then I would email them both that whatever they knew about each other or whatever they were up to. And some players actually, I think I even asked some players, hey, make connections to each other if you want, and then I'll weave them into the story. And so I think that was probably my favorite way, my favorite campaign that I've ever started, simply because it seemed to work really well.
And everybody knew everybody, right, in different ways.
Right.
So it made it easier to. Well, one, it was the way that it started was everybody was leaving this town, right, to get out, to get away from something.
Yeah, everybody got in trouble.
Had a reason for going.
They were all in trouble, and they all had to leave the town. Or maybe somebody actually had a quest or something.
I did.
I think you're the only one that didn't have to leave, but wanted to leave, and then you left at the same time as all these other people because all these other people needed to leave, and you guys are kind of all met on the road leaving Cormier. in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Which was how I planned it.
Which, that's how you want to be with a group of people
You
that you just randomly meet in the middle of the night as you're leaving a city.
Yeah, I think the other best game that I started was when I started a Pathfinder game, and I used my character that I planned to play but never did as the connection that everybody knew.
Yeah.
Because he was like a fixer. He was a pawn, not a pawn store.
Until they actually met him, then they didn't like him.
Yeah, they didn't like me. It's kind of funny. But every character had a connection to my character. Yeah. And like the sorcerer, he was the guy who got them like strange things for their components for their spells, or the wizard. And then there was the warrior, I got him like weapons that he wanted. And so everybody knew my character, and then my character turns up missing. And so they're all looking for him, and as they're looking for him, they're encountering each other, and then they figure out, I think his name was Belisarius.
Yeah.
And they go, Bess, it was why I shortened his name. And so he had left them a note, and then they went from there. That one and the other one, which I called To the King, I think it was.
Yes.
Better way of starting a game. And I really worked hard on that other game, To the King, because like I said, I kept emailing people and I needed a response. I go, you need to respond to me. You need to respond to me. What I did was there was at least two characters connected to each other, that they knew each other, that were friends or somehow connected to each other. And then on top of that, what happened was something happened that one night that you were planning on leaving, and there was like 2 or 3 things that happened, and they were all involved, right? Like
in different ways.
Like the thief was trying to, he was in a house stealing something, right? The thief, the rogue. There was 2 rogues, and they were stealing something. And then I think Mel's character got into a fight with some courtesan, right? Because he was courting somebody's wife. And so he got caught. And so he goes running out. There's a commotion in the house that these 2 guys are stealing from. And they see Mel's character running down the hallway, and they're like, what's going on? And so Mel jumps out the window, and they're like, holy shit, the jig is up. And they think something's up. It was really fun starting, and I just remember that one. And I think it was fun and I think it went well because I had done all this pre-work ahead of time.
Well, I think that's what session zeros now do, right? You
Correct.
Or certain games have it so you need to have a connection to one of the people.
Right.
And the more connections that there are, the easier it is for plot hooks, right?
Right.
Because that was everybody was leaving the city at the same time, and it was,
for different reasons.
But you get together, then it's easier than you walk into a tavern and
right. But it took a lot of more work, right? I mean, it was more work for me to get that off the ground, and amazingly, it went off without a hitch. I mean, the players were totally involved and totally committed to what was going on, and they really bit hard into that.
They really liked the idea because you had sent them all emails, right?
Right.
And they really enjoyed the idea that they knew things about other players, but they didn't necessarily know that those other players or other people didn't know that, right?
Right.
So they were like, it was an intrigue kind of thing.
Right, because Mel was like, I think he was a bard even, right? So he was a classic, court person. And so obviously he's dressed really nice. He's obviously cultured and stuff. And everybody knew, like, why is this guy leaving Cormier, the Suzeo is the city, in the middle of the night?
The rogues didn't actually know what he did or anything.
No, but they saw him.
They saw him running.
And obviously something bad had happened.
So they were suspicious.
And as he's passing by, I think he saw them, but he didn't like really see them because they were all in the dark. But he kind of, and I secretly sent them an email saying, these guys look familiar. Do you think you saw them in the house? So, but they don't seem to recognize you. And so he goes, okay. So there was all this, you're right, there was all this information that I had sent beforehand that had done all that work. And then, like, you're right, some people knew information about other people and they didn't even know that they knew about that information, right? That they didn't know who they were.
And I think Ian and Augustine were both Outlanders.
Yes.
And they just happened to be walking on the road, same road.
They were, I think you're right. You encountered them as you were leaving. Yeah.
So that's one way to start an adventure, right? These people know each other, sort of, but they just all run into each other. And, I had a mission myself.
Yes.
And they just came along.
And so it was a good idea. And then they're on the road by themselves and they're like
It's always better to be with people
Right.
and not be by yourself on the
Right.
road.
So that's exactly. And I think there was an escort of some sort, like a convoy going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was good. It was a good beginning, and it was a plot. I mean, everybody was like totally committed to the plan that I had. So it was interesting. I think it worked out really well. Now I'm finding it hard to believe that some of these people, like I said, they completely ignore the plot hook that the GM is laying out. I don't even know, like that one with the serial killer. There's another one where the one with the manor house and stuff.
Well, see, if I would have been in the plot with the serial killer, I would have found him and killed him right away because I don't like that. I mean, that's like something that
But
anybody in our group, that would be a moral imperative that you must capture this person.
Do you think we don't know enough information?
No,
but did they know that he was a serial killer?
Well, after 3 towns, you would think one of the players would have figured it out.
Or even a character would know, hey, every time we go to a town, somebody dies in more or less the same way. Well, they get kidnapped and then they're killed. They're found dead. But I don't know. Maybe these guys are just oblivious blockheads. I don't know.
I can't imagine a role player. I mean, unless they're just ignoring it on purpose, right?
That's what I'm saying. I think they had to. Right? Like the same thing with the manor, unless the guy totally forgot about his plot hook, about his background.
You've run the adventures for us where we ran into someone was murdered and you're trying to figure out who the murderer is, kind of thing. And none of us would ever walk away from something like that, right? Like the kids were like, oh, okay. And they didn't know how to do investigations, right? But they figured it out.
Right.
I'll go and talk to this person.
Right.
And that kind of thing, different.
So they thought it was important to find who's killing this person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Those are some pretty oblivious characters and players, and I don't know if there's any plot hook.
And I could see an adversarial GM come out of that situation, right? You're not following this guy. This guy comes and kills you.
Yeah, I don't know. I you would think that these horror stories of plot hooks and those GMs, they have to be ignoring it either on purpose or just be totally oblivious. I mean, there's only 2 options that there is.
Well, and there are some players that, don't want to bite on they don't want to be railroaded. And they're not going to do what you want them to do.
That's true.
That they have that kind of attitude,
yes.
Right? So then you kind of just have to go wherever they're going to go and either come up with something on the fly or just...
The whole group like that is different than, like, I've come across one player that was like that was just, I call him a crap disturber, right? Because I told him at the very beginning of the game, I go, this is my first game. I've never run this game. This is a pre-written adventure. It's going to be a little bit railroady. And so it was all like, you're going on this road, literally a road. And the person goes, I want to go over there. What's over there? And then, like, he basically convinced the whole group to go some direction that I had no experience or even think, and so I'm thinking on the fly, and I heard from other people that this person continually would do that in games. So I'm like, oh, okay, so that's just
makes it you not want to run games for those people.
Exactly, because I'm thinking they just want to, what is it?
Upset the cart.
Yeah. Turn over the cart and
see what happens.
Right? And make you think on the fly, or they don't like I said, like you said, they don't want to be railroaded. So if they go opposite direction that your GM doesn't think of, then they're not railroaded. They're on their own, or they have freedom of movement.
And if you're a smart GM, you can just deal with that, right? You just you do, or if you have your own ways of dealing with stuff. That's fine. Go that way. There's nothing there.
Right.
And if they want to stay there, fine. Or if you want to just move your encounters that way, go for it.
So I think if you make plot hooks for beginning players less plentiful, no red herrings, and have maps and stuff and details about that plot hook, most players will bite on those plot hooks. Later on, when they gain more experience, you can give them red herrings. You can give them multiple plot lines and see which ones they go into, which direction they go into.
There's nothing wrong with side quests. No. Just make sure that if you're giving out don't make it the bear that you have nothing to do, right? Or they're just gonna go kill it.
And then sometimes you have no. There's no.
You have no
reason.
agenda.
there's no rhyme or reason which way the players want to go. They'll just like they'll latch on to something like you may have innocently just said, and like, oh, and it just piqued their interest.
That's what we want.
That's the big W, right? That's where they want to go. So I think as a GM, you just got to think on your feet in that sense and hang in there.
Yeah.
Go for the ride.
There you go. Good luck. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.